When you work for a management consulting firm, it's almost like you're training for an Olympic sport. You work really long hours, you work at a really fast pace.
Most consultants leave after 2 to 3 years. First of all, why? And second of all, what is the best time to leave consulting?
It depends.
What does work-life balance look like for McKinsey Consultants?
It depends.
How would you rank the most desirable exit options for consultants?
It depends.
Why do so many McKinsey consultants go on to become CEOs?
You kind of get exposed to like leadership and executive type work so early on.
Are consultants just expensive scapegoats? Hey Keeners, welcome back to Jumpstart Your Career with me, your host, Gary. Today, we are resuming our conversation with Langni about her career in consulting after graduating from Queen's and wrapping up her internship at McKinsey in her third year summer. So if you're someone who's interested in consulting or you're just curious about this career path or how to navigate your career post-graduating, I think this will be a really good episode to listen to. And as always, please subscribe to this channel, follow this podcast wherever you listen to. Most of you who are watching this are not subscribed, so how are you gonna know when my new video comes out? I'm just kidding. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the episode. What are some signs that you should be a consultant for university students?
If you have commitment issues. I think that's a big one for me. Both of my parents have kind of been in their roles for like decades.
Yeah.
And I remember being so stressed in college and in university. It's like, there's no part of me that knows I want this career for 50 years.
Yeah.
I wanted to keep learning and keep trying new things and all of that. And consulting's perfect for that because you're doing like a new project, new people, new topic, new industry every couple of weeks or months. The other one I would say is like you're intellectually curious. Like you like trying to figure out how things work. I think that's why like the engineering brain lends itself pretty well to consulting. I'm a big like why and how thinker. For example, like I remember being a kid and seeing like, oh, this company rebranded their packaging. Like, why did they do that? You know, or you get hyperfixated on the randomest things. Like the one hyperfixation that I had going that summer, actually, it started here in Woodsworth, was trying to figure out how like elevator algorithms worked.
Okay.
Does it optimize for cost savings or for like getting people to the places fastest on time? Like how does that, you know what I mean? It's so random, but if you're someone that like enjoys problem solving and thinking about these like really niche kind of nerdy things, like that's pretty cool. And then the last thing I would say is like, you're a people person. It's such a meme that consultants are professional yappers. Not every consultant has to be like a huge extrovert, but if you enjoy client work and professional services, might be like a good spot for you.
So I wanted to ask you a bit more about specifically your time at McKinsey. Not anything like confidential or anything like that, but maybe more so just like the things you learned or the people that you've met. What does work-life balance look like for McKinsey consultants?
It depends. It really depends on the project. It can range from literally like 9 to 5 hours, working 40 hours a week to like working 100 plus hours. I know that work-life balance is something that's pretty important to me. Honestly, as much as I wish I was a, perfect capitalist machine, like I need to sleep 8 hours a day or I can't function, which is honestly why I was like, okay, I can't do investment banking. But there's ways you can kind of solve for better work-life balance. For example, if you do like a longer term project, usually it's a bit more sustainable. If you work with like really great people leaders who know how to prioritize work and minimize churn, you're, working a little bit more efficiently. Certain client types lend themselves to better work-life balance. For example, if you're working with, like an investment bank, if your clients are working around the clock, you're working around the clock. But if you work for like a retail client, they probably work a 9 to 5. So it might be more chill for you.
Okay, interesting. And then I guess this is another question, but what does the compensation structure look like for McKinsey? Like, honestly,
good question, because I had no idea until I got my offer.
Yeah.
And it really differs. I would go onto this website called like levels.fyi. Everything's public information. So I think when you start at any of these firms, like the base for an undergrad BA equivalent, the names are also different. It usually starts around, I think, 100K, which is really good for, right out of school.
6-figure starting salary.
Yeah. But the craziest part about consulting comp is not like where you start, but how fast it grows. If you really accelerate through the development, I think it's something like your salary doubles maybe like every 2 to 3 years.
So that's crazy.
You can see like, obviously it caps off at a certain point, but you can see all of this information on like levels.fyi. I will say the one thing that I didn't realize, and I'm so thankful that it kind of worked out for me, is that there's a really big compensation gap between different types of consulting firms. So for example, MBB and a couple of other like strategy management consulting firms, I guess at the end of the day, they're just like selling a more premium offering. They charge clients more, which is probably why they like pay you more as well. They're like probably all around the same, give or take, like 5 to 10K. But at other firms, whether it's like, for example, like the big 4 accounting firms that do consulting, depending on the practice, it can be like significantly less, even though like the nature of work might be similar. So I think that's like good to keep in mind too.
So are you saying there's a huge gap between MBB and Big Four, or within the departments at Big Four?
I actually am not as familiar with like Big Four, like within the departments how it works, but I remember like there's a really big gap between MBB strategy firms and then other types of consulting firms. I've heard of like positions starting as low as like 50K, which is still a really good salary. But if you think about it, like I didn't think the gap between the different companies in the same industry would be as big as they are.
I think, for example, like my friends, some of them are starting at KPMG management consulting literally like soon. They're getting paid 70K or 75K versus 100K. So most consultants leave after 2 to 3 years. First of all, why? And second of all, what is the best time to leave consulting?
It depends. The more I grow and mature, the more I'm like, forget the 5-year target. Go for the opportunities that will help you inform that decision. For me, when I left McKinsey, I wasn't actively recruiting. I wasn't looking for the next job. It was actually like an inbound opportunity that someone in my professional network, they essentially like made me an offer to join them. And at that time, I thought about like the learning opportunities I wanted, all of the things that I cared about, compensation being one of them, professional development, all of that stuff. And it was the right fit for me. People usually leave the firm after a couple of years because, you know, a lot of people are like me. You go into consulting because maybe you almost want to like extend school for a bit and just continue your divergent path of learning. And then maybe you figure out what you want to do next. I have some friends who are working in public health now, like working at really cool countries, advancing things that they feel really passionate about. Some people leave for PE to, you know, chase the bag and pursue finance. Some people like are at Harvard or Stanford doing grad school.
Which is comped, I heard, like free MBA.
Yeah. So even now, what's really cool is like, even after I left McKinsey, as a BA, they'll let you essentially go to school within 2 years or something like that and then like pay for it. The thing is you do have to come back for the amount of time that you went to school for, which sounds like a really good deal. And I was very seriously thinking about that. I think naturally a lot of people sometimes just want to break too. It's like a little bit of a gap year. I kind of decided to do this little like entrepreneurial sabbatical thing instead of doing the traditional grad school route.
And like speaking of like, you know, exit opportunities, people leaving, how would you rank the most desirable exit options for consultants?
Whatever, like it depends. I'm such a horrible podcast guest, but it depends on what you want to do. Are you solving for a career in a niche field? Are you solving for money? Are you solving for better work-life balance? Are you solving for a personal reason? I think the biggest thing that I had no idea to even think about when I was a student is like, as much as life is separate than work, they're so intertwined, right? Because especially for someone that cares a lot about your career, it could bring you to another country. It changes your life completely, right? For example, especially like as a woman, you think about, do you want to have kids eventually? Like, how do you want to think about family? Some people have like personal reasons or professional reasons to relocate. So one person's ideal exit opportunity is maybe like whatever job brings them to Australia. Someone else's exit op might be like whatever brings them to $1 million net worth fastest. You know, I think though, like the best thing you can do in your first couple of years of your career is to figure out what those priorities are for yourself and solve around that.
Such a mature answer. Like, I think like if I ask someone my age, they'll be like, become a CEO, obviously, or like, you know, like go into like PE, like go into a hedge fund and make that as much money as possible. Or like, you know, work for the government, like you have so much power, like change the world, whatever. But then I think at the end of the day, it's like, it's so hard to like put everything into like black and white. Like, sure, like most prestigious, most desirable, it doesn't work like that sometimes.
No, and I know it's not the sexy answer to give, the whole it depends.
No, this is not good for content.
Not good for content. I would have given you probably a different answer when I was like in the thick of it, when I was like 21, but
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm like washed up now.
No, I think it's like so different because I podcast with like 20-year-olds, and then when I talk to you, it's like such a different experience because
I'm like 43 now.
I mean 25, but like which is like basically 30. No, I'm kidding.
Oh my God.
Because you worked at McKinsey, I wanted to ask you about this phenomenon that a lot of people talk about, which is why do so many McKinsey consultants go on to become CEOs? I think I saw the stat somewhere that says that 90% of people who leave McKinsey become like essentially a C-suite executive at big companies in the future. So many Fortune 500 CEOs come from McKinsey. So like, what is this like McKinsey to CEO pipeline? Like what is going on here?
I think a couple of things. I don't know if it's like causation or correlation. I don't know if it's like you go to McKinsey, so you end up as a CEO. I think people who maybe like aspire to be a CEO one day, care about corporate America and leadership and all those things.
Yeah.
Maybe like McKinsey's a natural place for them to start. I think the McKinsey mafia is similar to a lot of the other mafias that exist. For example, like in tech, there's like the PayPal mafia, you know, I think the Palantir mafia. It's like all these people that worked at these big tech companies that went off to like start unicorns, or even like an academic institution, like think about all the Harvard alumni that are doing like all these crazy things, you know? Obviously, McKinsey is very competitive to get into. So naturally, they're picking like the best talent, which maybe is like a potential indicator of being successful in the corporate world. The other thing is like you kind of get exposed to like leadership and executive type work so early on. Like I remember one of my first projects at McKinsey, I was sitting across the table from a CFO, you know? So normally in any other industry, you would never be invited into the boardroom for a really high level executive conversation. But in consulting, you spend all your days working on whatever's keeping like the senior leaders awake, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of learn how it works, you get exposed to it, you build the network. So naturally, like the more you know, the more you learn, the better you are at it, maybe the more interested you are in at it. So that's kind of my guess.
Yeah. Speaking of, I guess like working with CEOs, there is this really popular TikTok where this one guy was saying how McKinsey consultants are essentially just really expensive scapegoats for CEOs. It's crazy, but he was talking about how these CEOs, when they hire McKinsey, they don't expect these consultants to come in and save the company or like do great work. Instead, they sort of offload these very risky decisions to McKinsey and get them to come to a verdict or make a decision like lay off this many people or do this and that. And when things do go wrong and backfire, instead of firing the CEO, they'll just fire McKinsey and be like, oh, like this is not my fault. McKinsey came up with this idea, so let's just fire them. And then the cycle repeats when a new CEO comes and they just hire another company.
So the reason you actually end up hiring management consultants is because you want to offload the risk of a bad decision or bad process to them. So in the case that you hire them and something goes wrong, you as an executive can then say, well, I didn't do the bad work. I didn't make the decision. At the end of the day, it was McKinsey or Bain or whoever that ended up doing all the work. They gave us this recommendation and that recommendation was bad. Therefore, I shouldn't be fired. And instead, we should fire McKinsey and then get another consulting company so that we could do the same thing over and over again.
Do you think that's true? Like, are consultants just expensive scapegoats?
I think that's a super sensationalized take, which the name McKinsey is super sensationalized in the media and everything in itself. I personally don't think I've ever worked on a project where that was the case. If you think about it from a reasonable person's perspective, McKinsey or any of these firms are so expensive to hire for the clients, right? A lot of like even Fortune 500 companies, like there's shareholders, there's the board, you know what I mean? So it's hard to convince people who presumably are very smart and have good judgment and care about how you're spending their money to like for personal gain, if that makes sense. These are like sometimes multi-million-dollar contracts. Another way to frame it in a more like value-driven way is like risk management is a huge thing. If a company's about to make a really big decision, make a really big investment, it helps to have a second pair of eyes on it, especially a second pair of very expertise-driven, very like smart eyes. Sometimes McKinsey goes into a client context and maybe comes up with something brand new. Sometimes they go into validate or invalidate a hypothesis that the client has. It's always tied to value. I don't know, maybe there's like someone out there who knows how to play this game and convince everyone in the world but like
if you think about it, it doesn't really add up. Like it doesn't.
There's like so many like procurement, governance, like all of these checks that go into place that as much as I wish I could, hire McKinsey for my own personal gain, like it just doesn't work like that.
What are the most important lessons that you learned from your time at McKinsey?
First one is what like the whole TikTok video went viral for, but like biz riz. The number one thing I think I got from 2 years at McKinsey that helped me land a director level role at 23 is literally this notion of developing biz riz.
Yes.
Which to me is just like, how do you have executive presence, build relationships with like really senior leaders and like know how to hang in these types of like business contexts, especially like as a young woman, Gen Z, whatever, because it's like scary and you like definitely don't naturally belong. But I think it's like through exposure therapy, the more you surround yourself with people in these environments, the better you are at communicating, relationship building your personal brand, things like that. Another thing I would say is you just learn how to have like super high horsepower. When you work for a management consulting firm like McKinsey, it's almost like you're training for an Olympic sport. You work really long hours. You work at a really fast pace, often on like really interesting problems. You get a ton of coaching and mentorship. So you just learn how to produce really fast at a really high quality, regardless of, what the topic or context is. The third thing is, this isn't really like something that I learned, but something that I gained that was a lot of value, which is you learn a lot about yourself really quick, I think. It forces you to maybe grow up a little faster because one, you usually just hang out with like older people a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But also it's really interesting the lifestyle that comes with it. When I was, 22, 23, a lot of my like really good friends were maybe still in school or like had other types of jobs. And all of a sudden you make like this type of money and you get to like fly business class and you get to like stay in these really insane hotels.
Spend money like rappers.
So when I was at McKinsey, I was at the Four Seasons, the Ritz. My teams were going jet skiing for team events. I'm not kidding when I say we spent money like we were rappers.
Yes and no. Depends on the state of the economy and like the people and everything. But you really kind of mature quickly and you realize like what your personal priorities are, your boundaries are, what type of life you might want to live. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like McKinsey was just this like new, bigger pond that I was able to like swim into.
That is like so interesting. And it's like why like maybe consulting is one of the most desirable career pathways for people who are just starting out when they're early on.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't like rainbows and daisies and all of that, but I would be lying if I said I like wasn't grateful for it. It was such a privilege to be able to have that type of environment to start off my career, even though it was really, really hard and challenging at times.
There's a lot more questions that I want to ask you still. I know like we had like so many questions planned out and we're so excited for this, but I know you have to leave soon and I keep my word. So the last question that I want to ask you is, if you can go back in time and talk to a 18-year-old Langni who maybe just entered Queens and you only had 60 seconds because it's 11:39 right now, what would you say?
I don't even know. What would I say to myself at 18? I would tell myself to go play more. I think the biggest, most difficult thing to manage when you are always chasing a goal and being really high achieving, throughout my whole life, like growing up, it was a competitive sport. And then it was like my career, school, all of that stuff is like mental health, physical health, well-being, things like that. How do you like stay happy and healthy, physically fit? It's so important. And it's really easy to become hyperfixated on something that's like a little bit more materialistic, such as your career. And that matters, obviously. But what matters is a lot more, at least for me, is my friends, my family, my health, who I am as a person, my character, things like that. And I think college was such a stressful time for me because I, was spending all my free time making PowerPoint pages instead of like doing an intramural sport. And that is something that I really wish I would have done. And I think would have taught me like much more sustainable like lifestyle habits.
Yeah. Langni Zhang, thank you so much for coming on to Jumpstart Your Career. I hope we run it back another time. We're both in Toronto and this was so much fun. And hopefully you guys really like this episode and don't leave too many hate comments because you've been getting some hate on TikTok.
I think I will say first off, like the positive feedback's definitely like way more overwhelming than the negative, but obviously like
Yeah.
the haters are the ones that are going to comment and say something nasty.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be like demure and not clap back at them, but sometimes they're like a little
Yeah.
silly and funny and I can't help myself.
Exactly. And if you want to keep up with Langni's journey, you can find her on TikTok.
Yeah, drop a comment. I literally just sit on my couch and like answer these questions. So
Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section. And if you have time, feel free to maybe respond to them as well. But yeah, overall, thanks so much again. Okay, that is it of our conversation with Langni Zhang. As always, feel free to hit that subscribe button or follow this podcast anywhere you listen or watch on. It will really help me out so much. And Keeners, I'll see you next week.